I'm Maya Rodriguez, and 11 years ago, my family erased me from their perfect life. Not literally, of course, but they might as well have killed me off because that's exactly what they told everyone in Austin. Dead in a car accident, they said. Gone forever. It was so much easier than admitting their eldest daughter had become an embarrassment to the Rodriguez name. While my beautiful sister Isabella lived like a princess, I was the family secret they wanted to bury. But what happens when the dead come back to life? What happens when the daughter you threw away becomes more powerful than you ever imagined? Tonight at their New Year's Eve party in Manhattan, my family is about to find out that some ghosts refuse to stay buried. Let me take you back to where it began. My hands pressed against the cold glass of the taxi window as I stared up at the Manhattan penthouse 11 floors above me. Golden light spilled from every window, and I could see silhouettes moving around inside what I knew was my family's annual New Year's Eve party. 11 years. That's how long it had been since I'd seen any of them. 11 years since I walked away from the Rodriguez name, from Austin, from everything I thought was my life. The taxi driver cleared his throat. "You getting out, miss, or we sitting here all night?" I handed him a 50 and stepped onto the sidewalk, my designer heels clicking against the concrete. The woman who stood here tonight was nothing like the one who had left Texas all those years ago. Back then, I was Maya Rodriguez, the disappointing older daughter who never measured up. Tonight, I was someone else entirely, though they had no idea who I'd become. Growing up in Austin as a Rodriguez meant something. My father, Richard Rodriguez, had built an empire worth $85 million from oil investments and tech ventures. He was the kind of self-made man Texas loved to celebrate with his commanding presence and sharp business instincts. My mother, Victoria, had been Miss Texas back in 1989 before she married into success and became the queen of Austin high society. Together, they created what everyone considered the perfect family. Well, almost perfect. There was Isabella, my younger sister by 4 years, who had been winning beauty pageants since she could walk. Even at 5 years old, she had this natural grace that made everyone stop and stare. Golden hair that caught the light, just right blue eyes that sparkled when she smiled, and a personality that charmed every adult she met. She was everything my parents had dreamed of in a daughter. And then there was me. I was the before picture in every comparison. While Isabella glided through rooms like she owned them, I stumbled. While she posed for family photos with natural confidence, I stood awkwardly to the side, trying to make myself smaller. By the time I was 10 and Isabella was 6, the roles were set in stone. She was the golden child, the future of the Rodriguez legacy. I was the practice round the one they'd figure out what not to do with. Our house in Austin was this sprawling estate with white columns and perfectly manicured gardens that Victoria loved to show off during her charity events. Every room was decorated to impress, every detail calculated to reinforce our family's status. But walking through those halls as a kid, I always felt like an intruder. The family portraits lining the main staircase told the story clearly. In the early ones, I was front and center as the firstborn. But as Isabella grew older and more beautiful, I gradually moved to the edges of the frame, and in some of the later photos, I wasn't there at all. The only person in that house who ever really saw me was Maria Santos, our housekeeper. She'd been with the family since before I was born, and she had these kind eyes that never judged. When Victoria would make her cutting comments about my appearance, or when Richard would dismiss my struggles in school, Maria would find me afterward and remind me that I had value beyond what my family could see. "You're going to surprise them all someday, Mija," she'd whisper, while helping me with my homework at the kitchen table. "Your heart is bigger than this house, and your mind is sharper than they know." I wished Maria could see me now, standing on this Manhattan street corner wearing a dress that cost more than most people's cars. But she'd passed away 3 years ago, and I'd learned about it through an online obituary. The family hadn't thought to contact me. According to them, I was already dead. That was the story they'd chosen to tell when I disappeared. It was easier than explaining why their eldest daughter had walked away from all this wealth and privilege. Easier than admitting they'd driven me out with years of comparison and criticism and emotional neglect. Looking up at the party happening above me, I could see Isabella through the windows. Even from this distance, she was radiant, moving through the crowd of guests with that same effortless grace she'd always possessed. She was 28 now, married to some investment banker from a political family, living the life my parents had always envisioned for her. What they didn't know was that the daughter they'd written off, the one they'd claimed had died, was about to walk back into their lives. And this time I wasn't coming as the family disappointment. This time, I was coming as their biggest threat. Retry. The memories hit me like a punch to the gut as I stood there on that cold December night. Isabella's 16th birthday party in 2016 was supposed to be a celebration, but it became the night I realized just how expendable I was to my own family. I was 24 then, still living at home and struggling through community college, while Isabella flourished in high school. Victoria had spent months planning the party, transforming our Austin estate into something out of a fairy tale. White roses everywhere, a live band, and 200 of the most important people in Texas society. The guest list read like a who's who of oil money and political power. I'd spent weeks picking out the perfect dress, something elegant but not too flashy. I didn't want to upstage Isabella, but I wanted to look like I belonged in my own family. When I came downstairs that night, Victoria took one look at me, and her face fell. "Oh, Maya," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "That color does nothing for you. And honey, you really should have done something about your hair." Isabella appeared at the top of the staircase in a stunning powder blue gown that made her look like a princess. The contrast was immediate and painful. She glided down the stairs while I stood there, feeling like the ugly stepsister in every fairy tale. The photographer arrived early to capture family portraits before the guests arrived. He was this trendy guy from Dallas who specialized in high society events, and he immediately started positioning us for the perfect shot. But something wasn't working for him. He kept adjusting our poses, moving me around, trying different angles. Finally, he pulled Victoria aside, and I heard him whisper, "Maybe we should focus on the birthday girl and her parents for the formal shots. The older daughter doesn't quite fit the aesthetic we're going for." Victoria nodded immediately. Of course, this is Isabella's special day after all. Richard, who had been checking his phone during the whole photo session, looked up and agreed without even considering how it might feel to be excluded. "Maya, why don't you go check on the catering arrangements? Make yourself useful." I stood there, watching my family pose for portrait after portrait without me. 3 generations of Rodriguez family photos would hang in our hallway, and I wouldn't exist in a single one of them. The photographer captured Isabella's radiant smile, Victoria's proud maternal glow, and Richard's satisfied expression. The perfect family finally complete without their imperfect daughter. The party itself was a nightmare. I tried to mingle with the guests, but conversations kept dying when I approached. Everyone wanted to talk to Isabella to congratulate my parents on raising such a beautiful daughter. I found myself standing alone by the refreshment table, watching my sister hold court like the young queen she was born to be. That's when I overheard Victoria talking to Mrs. Henderson, one of her closest friends from the country club. "Isabella is just everything we dreamed of in a daughter." Victoria was saying, her voice carrying that satisfied tone she used when discussing her greatest accomplishments. "Beautiful, charming, such natural grace. We're thinking about sending her to modeling school in New York after graduation." "What about your older daughter?" Mrs. Henderson asked, glancing in my direction. Victoria's smile tightened slightly. "Oh, Maya is still finding herself. Not everyone can have Isabella's gifts, unfortunately. Sometimes I think it might be better for everyone if she lived elsewhere, maybe found her own path away from all this. She's becoming quite the embarrassment at family functions." The words hit me like a physical blow. I set down my plate and walked toward the house, needing to escape before anyone saw the tears building in my eyes. But as I reached the French doors leading inside, I heard Richard's voice joining the conversation. "We've actually been discussing boarding school options," he said casually, as if they were talking about what to plant in the garden. Something in Colorado or maybe Vermont. Get her away from Texas society until she figures out how to present herself better. Isabella shouldn't have to be overshadowed by her sister's struggles. I ran inside and locked myself in my childhood bedroom, the walls still covered with participation ribbons and academic awards that had never impressed anyone. Through my window, I could see the party continuing in the garden below. Isabella was laughing at something someone had said, surrounded by admirers. My parents were beaming as they watched their perfect daughter shine. Around midnight, when the last guests were finally leaving, Victoria came upstairs and knocked on my door. "Maya," she called through the wood. "I know tonight was difficult, but you have to understand that sometimes sacrifices need to be made for the family image. Isabella has opportunities ahead of her that require our full support and attention." I didn't answer. I was already planning my escape from a family that had made it clear I was no longer welcome. The next morning, I started researching colleges far from Texas. If they wanted me gone, I'd give them exactly what they asked for. But I'd do it on my terms, not theirs. The breaking point came 6 months later when I discovered what my family had really been doing behind my back. I was helping my grandmother's estate attorney sort through her financial documents when I found the paperwork for my trust fund. According to the original documents, she had left me nearly $200,000 to be accessible when I turned 21. But when I checked the account balance, there was less than $5,000 remaining. I confronted Richard in his home office on a Tuesday evening in November. He was reviewing contracts for some new tech acquisition, barely looking up, when I walked in with the bank statements in my hand. "Dad, I need to ask you about grandmother's trust fund. There's money missing." He glanced at the papers I was holding and sighed like I was bothering him with something trivial. "Maya, you've never been good with numbers. I'm sure everything is in order." $200,000, Dad. "Where did it go?" Richard finally looked up from his computer, his expression shifting to that familiar mix of irritation and condescension. "That money was invested in family expenses that benefited everyone. Isabella's modeling portfolio, her private coaching, the photo shoots in New York. It was all legitimate family business. But it was my money. Grandmother left it specifically for me. And we used it to improve this family's prospects," he replied sharply. "Isabella's success benefits everyone, including you. Don't be selfish about this." I stood there staring at him, realizing that not only had he stolen my inheritance, but he genuinely believed he was justified in doing it. In his mind, anything that elevated Isabella elevated the family, and I was just collateral damage. The final humiliation came 3 weeks later when Victoria handed me the proof prints for the family Christmas cards. There were several poses to choose from, but in every single one I had been deliberately cropped out or positioned so far to the side that I was barely visible. The main card they had selected featured just the three of them: Richard, in a navy suit, Victoria, in elegant red, and Isabella, looking like a Christmas angel in white. I found Victoria in the kitchen supervising Maria as she prepared dinner for some business associates Richard was entertaining. "Mom, I'm not in the Christmas card at all." Victoria didn't even pause in her conversation with Maria about the menu. She responded without looking at me, her voice matter-of-fact and cold. "Darling, the card represents the image we want to project to our friends and business associates. You understand?" "No, I don't understand. I'm your daughter." That's when she finally turned to face me, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never wanted to acknowledge before. It wasn't just disappointment or frustration. It was genuine disgust. "Maya, you're 24 years old and you're still struggling through community college. You have no direction, no achievements worth mentioning, and frankly, you don't photograph well with the rest of us. This card goes to governors, senators, Fortune 500 CEOs. We need to present our best face." When Richard came home that evening, I tried one more time to make them understand how their choices were affecting me. I asked him to sit down in the living room away from Isabella, who was practicing her runway walk in the hallway. "Dad, I feel like I'm disappearing from this family. The photos, the money now, the Christmas cards. I need to know that I still matter to you." He looked at me for a long moment and I thought maybe I had finally gotten through to him. Then he spoke, and his words destroyed any hope I had left. Maya, you've never lived up to the Rodriguez name. Your sister represents everything this family stands for: beauty, success, excellence. You represent our failures. Maybe it would be better for everyone if you found your own path somewhere else away from our social circle. Isabella appeared in the doorway at that moment, having heard the conversation. For a second, I thought she might defend me, or at least show some sympathy. Instead, she just looked uncomfortable and walked away, choosing silence over sisterhood. That night, I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to fight for a place in a family that didn't want me. I wasn't going to beg for love from people who saw me as an embarrassment. I was going to disappear, but on my own terms. I spent the next 2 months quietly preparing. I applied to colleges in Boston, far enough away that I would never accidentally run into anyone from my old life. I saved every penny from my part-time job at a local photography studio. I arranged for a post office box and slowly moved my important documents out of the house. On January 15, 2017, while my family was attending a charity gala in downtown Austin, I packed everything I truly needed into 2 suitcases and left. I took my grandmother's jewelry, my photography equipment, and the small amount of money I had managed to save. I left behind everything else, including the Rodriguez name, that had never really belonged to me anyway. The last thing I did before walking out the door was leave a note on my pillow where Maria would find it the next morning when she came to clean my room. Boston in January 2017 was brutal, but the cold felt like freedom compared to the suffocating atmosphere I had left behind in Texas. I found a tiny studio apartment in Alston, barely big enough for a bed and a desk, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I was living under my own rules, making my own decisions, and nobody was there to tell me I wasn't good enough. Boston Community College wasn't exactly Harvard, but it was a fresh start. I enrolled under my full legal name, Maya Rose Rodriguez, though I started introducing myself as Maya Rose to anyone new I met. It felt like shedding an old skin, leaving behind the part of me that had been crushed under the weight of family expectations. The academic struggles followed me to Boston, though. I was taking basic math and English courses, trying to build a foundation I had never properly developed, but the words on the page still seemed to swim around. Numbers still felt like a foreign language. I would sit in the library for hours, reading the same paragraph over and over, frustrated and exhausted. Professor Amanda Foster noticed my struggles during her Introduction to Computer Science course. She was this brilliant woman in her early 40s who had worked at several tech companies before coming to teach. After class one day in March, she asked me to stay behind. Maya, I've been watching you work and I can see you have great problem-solving instincts. But you seem to be fighting against something when you read or write. Have you ever been tested for learning differences? I felt my face flush with embarrassment. My family always said I was just lazy, that I didn't try hard enough. Professor Foster sat down next to me, her voice gentle but direct. Learning disabilities are neurological differences, not character flaws. Some of the most brilliant people I know process information differently. Would you be open to getting tested through our Student Services Department? The testing took place over several sessions in April. When the results came back, everything finally made sense. Severe dyslexia. The specialist explained how my brain processed written information differently, why I had always struggled with traditional learning methods, and most importantly, what accommodations could help me succeed. With extra time on tests, audio textbooks, and specialized software that read text aloud, my grades improved dramatically. For the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting against my own mind to learn. Professor Foster started mentoring me outside of class, introducing me to adaptive technology and accessibility software design. You have a unique perspective, Maya, she told me one afternoon as we worked on a simple coding project together. You understand barriers that most developers never consider. That insight could be incredibly valuable. I started spending every free moment in the computer lab learning programming languages and experimenting with user interface design. Professor Foster introduced me to the concept of universal design, creating technology that worked for everyone, including people with disabilities. It was like finding my calling. But the most shocking discovery came 6 months after I had left Austin. Professor Foster had connections throughout the academic world, and she mentioned my story to a colleague who had grown up in Texas social circles. The colleague knew the Rodriguez family and had some disturbing news. "Maya, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be difficult to hear. My friend says your family has been telling people in Austin that you died in a car accident. They're saying it happened shortly after you left for college." The words hit me like a physical blow. It was one thing to be excluded from family photos and Christmas cards. It was another thing entirely to be erased from existence. They had chosen to tell people I was dead, rather than admit I had walked away from their perfect family narrative. I felt a mix of rage and liberation. If they wanted me dead to the world, then I would truly disappear. I would become someone new, someone they could never dismiss or diminish again. That night, I made a decision that would shape everything that came next. I would stop using the Rodriguez name entirely. I would build a new identity from scratch, one that had nothing to do with Texas oil money, or beauty pageants, or family disappointment. I would become successful enough that someday when the truth came out, they would realize exactly what they had thrown away. Professor Foster helped me apply for scholarships to transfer to MIT. My portfolio of accessibility projects was strong enough to catch the attention of their computer science department. The transformation was happening faster than I had ever imagined possible. By the end of my first year in Boston, I was no longer the same person who had fled Austin in tears. I was stronger, smarter, and most importantly, I was beginning to understand my own worth. The Rodriguez family had done me a favor by pushing me out. They had forced me to discover who I really was underneath all their expectations and criticisms. As I prepared to transfer to MIT in the fall, I made myself a promise. I would build something extraordinary, something that would help people like me who had been told they weren't smart enough or good enough. And someday I would return to show them exactly who Maya Rodriguez had become. MIT in the fall of 2018 was like stepping into a completely different universe. The campus buzzed with innovation and possibility, and for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who celebrated intelligence rather than appearance. I threw myself into my computer science coursework with an intensity that surprised even me. My accessibility software projects caught the attention of several professors, but it was during a tech entrepreneurship seminar that I met the person who would change my trajectory completely. Samuel Chen was a guest speaker, a venture capitalist who specialized in assistive technology investments. After his presentation about the untapped market potential in accessibility solutions, I approached him with my portfolio. "This is impressive work," he said, scrolling through my prototype applications on his tablet. "You're addressing real problems that most developers ignore completely. Have you considered commercializing any of these solutions?" I explained my background, my struggles with dyslexia, and my vision for creating technology that could help millions of people who learned differently. Samuel listened intently, asking detailed questions about market-sized development costs and scalability. "I'd like to set up a formal meeting," he said, handing me his business card. "I think you might be onto something significant here." 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Samuel's Cambridge office, presenting a comprehensive business plan for what I was calling Phoenix Accessibility Tech. The name felt perfect, representing my own rise from the ashes of my old life. Samuel was impressed enough to offer seed funding and mentorship, but he had one concern. "You'll need a business identity that protects your personal privacy while you're building the company. Have you considered operating under a professional name?" I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "Mr. Chen," I said. "Maya Rose, but using your last name for credibility in the Asian tech market." Samuel smiled. "That works. Mr. Chen at Island." The business registration happened quickly, and by January 2019, Phoenix Accessibility Tech was officially born. I kept my personal transformation parallel to my professional one. The weight I had struggled with my entire life started coming off as I found healthier ways to manage stress and gained confidence in my abilities. I invested in professional styling, learned how to present myself with authority, and gradually became comfortable with success. The first major breakthrough came when Phoenix developed an AI-powered reading assistant that could adapt to individual learning patterns. Unlike existing accessibility software that used one-size-fits, all approaches our system learned from each user's specific challenges and adjusted accordingly. Beta testing in local schools showed remarkable results. By 2020, we had secured contracts with 3 major school districts in Massachusetts. By 2021, we were working with universities across New England. The revenue growth was exponential, and I was reinvesting everything back into research and development. Samuel introduced me to his network of Silicon Valley contacts, many of whom were impressed by both the technology and the mysterious founder who preferred to operate behind the scenes. Tech journalists started speculating about the identity of M.R. Chen, the reclusive entrepreneur who was revolutionizing accessibility technology. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was building a reputation as one of the most innovative young CEOs in the country, my own family believed I was dead. They had no idea that the daughter they had written off was creating solutions that were being used by millions of people worldwide. During one of my regular check-ins with Samuel in late 2021, he shared something that made my blood run cold. "I have to tell you something, Maya. I knew your family back in Austin. I actually dated your mother briefly in the late 90s before she married your father." I stared at him, processing this information. "You knew Victoria." "We had a relationship that lasted about 6 months. She was beautiful, ambitious, but ultimately chose wealth over love when Richard came along. I've followed the family's social presence over the years, and I know they've been telling people you died." The coincidence felt too significant to ignore. Samuel had been drawn to my story, partially because he understood the Rodriguez family dynamics from personal experience. He knew exactly what kind of people they were. "There's something else," he continued. "Your sister Isabella just got engaged to Marcus Wellington. His family has significant political connections, and they're very concerned about any potential scandals. If Isabella's family secrets were to surface, it could damage more than just the Rodriguez reputation." That was when I realized this wasn't just about personal vindication anymore. This was about exposing a family that had built their entire social standing on lies and manipulation. They had stolen my inheritance, erased me from their history, and convinced everyone I was dead. But I wasn't dead. I was more alive than I had ever been. By 2023, Phoenix Accessibility Tech was valued at over $150 million. I owned a penthouse in Boston, drove a Tesla, and had speaking engagements at major tech conferences around the world, all while maintaining complete anonymity from the people who had raised me. The transformation was complete. I was no longer Maya Rodriguez, the family disappointment. I was M.R. Chen, tech innovator and entrepreneur. But there was still one thing left to do. It was time to let the Rodriguez family know that their dead daughter was very much alive, and she was coming home. While I was building my empire in Boston, the Rodriguez family was facing challenges they had never encountered before. Through social media and occasional Google searches, I kept tabs on their lives from a distance, watching their carefully constructed world begin to show cracks. Isabella had become exactly what Victoria always dreamed she would be. Her Instagram account boasted over 2 million followers, and she had lucrative contracts with major fashion and beauty brands. She was the face of a Texas-based cosmetics company and had been featured on the covers of several regional magazines. From the outside, she looked like she was living the perfect life. But I could see signs that worried me even from 3,000 miles away. Her photos showed dramatic weight fluctuations, and she frequently posted about extreme workout routines and restrictive eating plans. The comments on her posts were filled with concern from followers who noticed she looked increasingly thin and exhausted. Victoria would respond to these concerns by praising Isabella's dedication to fitness and healthy living. But I recognized the warning signs that our family had always ignored. Isabella had gotten professional help for her relationship with food and exercise, working with therapists and nutritionists to develop healthier patterns. She was open about her journey on social media, sharing resources and encouraging others to seek support when needed. It was one of the few times I felt proud of how she was handling the pressure that had been placed on her since childhood. Richard's business was struggling in ways that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. Rodriguez Enterprises had built its reputation on traditional business software, but newer companies with innovative approaches were taking market share rapidly. What Richard didn't know was that several of his biggest competitors were using Phoenix accessibility text platforms to make their products more inclusive and appealing to a broader market. The irony was perfect. My technology was helping other companies succeed while his outdated approaches were failing. He was losing clients to businesses that understood the value of accessibility, something he had dismissed as unimportant when I was growing up. Victoria was aging in the way that terrified women like her most. Her social media posts showed increasingly desperate attempts to maintain her youthful appearance with frequent spa treatments, cosmetic procedures, and expensive skincare regimens. She was still beautiful, but she was fighting a battle against time that she couldn't win, and it was making her more bitter and controlling than ever. The family's financial pressures were becoming visible to anyone who knew what to look for. They had sold their vacation home in Colorado and downsized their household staff. Richard was taking on consulting projects rather than growing his own company, and Victoria's charity work had shifted to smaller, less prestigious organizations. Then came the announcement that changed everything. In the spring of 2023, Isabella got engaged to Marcus Wellington, the son of a prominent political family from Virginia. The engagement photos were stunning, showing Isabella radiant in a designer gown with Marcus, looking every inch the successful investment banker he was. But what I found most interesting was reading between the lines of the engagement announcement. Marcus's family clearly valued reputation and public image above almost everything else. His father was being mentioned as a potential candidate for governor, and any scandals or secrets in the family background could be devastating to their political ambitions. The wedding, held in October 2023, was everything Victoria had always dreamed of for her golden child. The guest list included senators, business leaders, and celebrities. The venue was a historic plantation estate outside Austin, transformed into something from a fairy tale with white roses and crystal chandeliers. I watched the coverage from my Boston penthouse, seeing my family celebrate Isabella's perfect life while maintaining the fiction that I had never existed. The wedding photos showed the Rodriguez family looking prosperous and happy, with no mention anywhere of a deceased older daughter. Marcus seemed genuinely in love with Isabella, but I wondered what he would think if he knew about the family secrets he was marrying into. Did he know about the missing daughter who had been erased from family history? Did he know about the financial improprieties that had funded his wife's modeling career? Did he know about his mother-in-law's past relationships, the lengths she would go to maintain her social status? Through my network of contacts, I learned that Marcus was a genuinely decent person who valued honesty and transparency. His political family had taught him that secrets always surface eventually, and that it was better to address problems directly than to hide them and hope they never came to light. As 2024 began, I realized that the time for watching from the sidelines was ending. Isabella's marriage to Marcus had created vulnerabilities in the Rodriguez family armor that hadn't existed before. They were now connected to people who couldn't afford scandals, people who would demand answers when the truth inevitably came out. The family that had tried to erase me from existence was about to discover that you can't bury the truth forever, and I was ready to help them learn that lesson in the most public way possible. In the spring of 2023, I made the decision to stop being a passive observer of my family's life and start actively investigating what they had been hiding. I hired Jennifer Martinez, a private investigator based in Austin, who specialized in financial fraud and family law cases. Jennifer had an impressive background with the Texas Attorney General's office and knew how to dig deep into corporate records and family finances. The first thing Jennifer uncovered made my blood boil. The paperwork confirmed what I had suspected about my grandmother's trust fund. Richard had systematically diverted money from my account over a 3-year period, using forged signatures and falsified documents to justify the transfers. The money had been funneled directly into accounts that paid for Isabella's modeling portfolio, her New York photo shoots, and even her designer wardrobe. But that was just the beginning. Jennifer discovered that Rodriguez Enterprises had been engaging in questionable business practices for years. Richard had been underreporting income to avoid taxes, using shell companies to hide assets, and manipulating financial statements to secure business loans. The paper trail was extensive and damaging. Jennifer told me during one of our phone calls, "Your father has been playing fast and loose with both family money and business finances for over a decade. If the right people saw these documents, he could face serious legal consequences." I asked Jennifer to keep digging, and what she found next was even more shocking. Isabella had married Marcus Wellington without telling him anything about her family's true history. Marcus believed he was marrying into a successful, respectable Texas business family. He had no idea that his wife had an older sister who had been written out of the family narrative. Through her contacts in Virginia political circles, Jennifer learned that Marcus had been asking subtle questions about Isabella's background. As the son of a family with gubernatorial ambitions, he needed to be certain there were no skeletons in the closet that could damage his father's political future. "Your sister's husband is getting suspicious," Jennifer reported. "He's hired his own background check company to investigate the Rodriguez family history. He's going to find discrepancies in the stories he's been told." The most explosive discovery came when Jennifer found evidence of Victoria's past relationship with Samuel Chen. She had uncovered photographs and documents that proved their affair had lasted much longer than Samuel had originally told me. More importantly, Victoria had been accepting money from Samuel during their relationship, money that she had hidden from Richard. I realized I had enough evidence to destroy my family's reputation completely, but I wanted to be strategic about how I used it. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice for the years of emotional abuse, financial theft, and the complete erasure of my existence. Samuel and I met at his office in Cambridge to review all the evidence Jennifer had gathered. The documents were spread across his conference table like pieces of a complex puzzle, each one representing another lie my family had built their life on. "This is more extensive than I expected," Samuel said, examining the financial records. "Your father could face criminal charges for some of these activities, and your mother's involvement in hiding assets makes her complicit in the fraud." I picked up one of the photos Jennifer had found showing Victoria and Samuel together at a restaurant in Dallas in 1998. They looked happy and carefree, completely unaware that their relationship would become ammunition in a family war decades later. Samuel I said, looking at him across the table, "I think it's time we let the Rodriguez family know that their dead daughter has been watching them all along." He smiled, but there was something sad in his expression. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Maya? Once you reveal yourself, there's no going back. Your family will never be the same." I thought about Maria Santos, who had believed in me when no one else would. I thought about all the students who were using Phoenix technology to overcome their learning challenges. I thought about the life I had built from nothing after being thrown away like garbage. "They made their choice when they decided to erase me," I said. "Now it's time for them to face the consequences." The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity. We would wait for the perfect opportunity, a public moment, when the entire family would be together with their social circle watching. We would expose not just their lies about me, but all the financial crimes and family secrets they had been hiding, and I knew exactly when that opportunity would present itself. The Rodriguez family's annual New Year's Eve party in Manhattan, where they gathered with all the most important people in their social and business network. It was time to come back from the dead. December 31st, 2024. The day I had been planning for over a year had finally arrived. I woke up in my Boston penthouse to fresh snow falling outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time in months I felt completely calm. Today, the Rodriguez family would learn that their dead daughter was very much alive. The guest list for their annual New Year's Eve party read like a who's who of American power and influence. Through social media posts and society page coverage, I had been tracking the attendees for weeks. Texas oil executives, tech industry leaders, politicians from both parties, and several celebrities who had homes in Austin. Marcus's father, the potential gubernatorial candidate, would be there with his political entourage. It was the perfect stage for maximum exposure. I spent the morning coordinating with my legal team and Phoenix's public relations department. My lawyers had prepared a comprehensive package documenting Richard's financial crimes, ready to be delivered to the appropriate authorities the moment I gave the signal. Our PR team had crafted statements for the media that would control the narrative and protect Phoenix's reputation while the family scandal unfolded. Samuel arrived at my apartment at noon with additional evidence Jennifer had uncovered just the day before. Bank records showing even more extensive financial manipulation and most damaging of all recorded phone conversations between Richard and a business associate discussing how to hide assets from potential investigators. "Maya, are you absolutely certain you want to do this?" Samuel asked as we reviewed the final details of our plan. "Once you walk into that party tonight, everything changes. Not just for your family, but for you too." I looked at him, this man who had known my mother decades before I was born, who had seen firsthand the kind of person she was capable of being. "I've been dead to them for 7 years, Samuel. It's time they learned what it feels like to have their lives turned upside down." I spent the afternoon at an exclusive Manhattan salon getting ready for the most important performance of my life. The stylist transformed my hair into an elegant updo that showed off the diamond earrings I had bought specifically for this occasion. My makeup was flawless but subtle, designed to enhance the natural beauty that my family had never bothered to see. The dress I had chosen was a deep emerald green that complemented my eyes and fit my transformed figure perfectly. It was expensive enough to signal success, but elegant enough to command respect. I wanted to look like exactly what I had become, a powerful businesswoman who belonged in rooms full of influential people. As evening approached, I reviewed the building plans for my family's Manhattan penthouse one final time. The doorman would recognize the name M.R. Chen and allow me access without question. I had legitimate business credentials that would get me past any security concerns. The timing had to be perfect, my arrival calculated for maximum impact. At 10:30, I called for a car service. The driver was professional and discreet, exactly what I needed for the short ride from my hotel to the building where my family was celebrating what they thought would be another successful year of maintaining their perfect facade. During the drive, I thought about Maria Santos, who would have been so proud to see what I had accomplished. I thought about Professor Foster, who had believed in my potential when I couldn't see it myself. I thought about all the students and professionals who were using Phoenix technology to overcome the same barriers that had once made me feel stupid and worthless. But mostly, I thought about the 24-year-old woman who had packed 2 suitcases and fled Austin in the middle of the night, convinced she was worthless because her own family had treated her like an embarrassment. That woman deserved justice, and tonight, she was finally going to get it. The car pulled up outside the building at exactly 11:25. Through the windows of the penthouse, I could see the party in full swing. Golden light, elegant silhouettes, the kind of celebration that had always excluded me. But tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't the awkward daughter hoping for acceptance. Tonight, I was M.R. Chen, successful entrepreneur and tech innovator, coming to collect what was owed to me. I stepped out of the car and looked up at those windows one last time, taking a deep breath of the cold December air. In 35 minutes, it would be 2025, and the Rodriguez family would finally learn the truth about what they had thrown away. The elevator ride to the 11th floor felt eternal, each floor marking another step closer to a confrontation 7 years in the making. When the doors opened, I could hear the party immediately. Jazz music, laughter, and the clink of champagne glasses created a soundtrack of celebration that had always existed without me. The doorman had cleared me without hesitation when I mentioned I was Mr. Chen, here to see the Rodriguez family. My business reputation preceded me in ways my personal identity never could. As I walked toward the penthouse entrance, I could see through the glass doors into the party beyond. The apartment was exactly what I expected from Victoria's taste. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors, and the furniture was arranged to create intimate conversation areas while maintaining clear sightlines across the space. Fresh white orchids and champagne-colored roses decorated every surface, creating an atmosphere of elegant sophistication. I paused at the entrance, taking in the scene before me. There was Isabella, radiant, in a champagne-colored dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. She was laughing at something a woman in designer jewelry was saying, her hand resting protectively on her flat stomach. Even from this distance I could see she looked healthier than she had in her social media posts, her face fuller and more relaxed. Victoria was holding court near the windows, wearing a navy blue gown that flattered her still impressive figure. She had aged well, though I could see the telltale signs of cosmetic work around her eyes and mouth. She was gesturing animatedly while telling some story to a group of well-dressed women who hung on her every word. Richard stood near the bar with a cluster of men in expensive suits, probably discussing business deals or political developments. He looked older than his 58 years, stress lines evident around his eyes, but he still carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. And there was Marcus, Isabella's husband, looking every inch the successful investment banker in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. He was handsome in that clean-cut, all-American way that political families favored, with an easy smile and confident handshake. He was currently speaking with an older man I recognized from news coverage as a prominent Texas senator. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The sound cut through the party noise, and I watched as someone, probably hired help, moved toward the door to answer it. Through the glass, I could see the moment my family first noticed the disruption. Isabella glanced toward the entrance with mild curiosity. Victoria paused mid-sentence in her story. Richard looked up from his business conversation with slight annoyance. The door opened, and a young woman in black and white server attire smiled at me professionally. "Good evening, I'm Mr. Chen. I believe I'm expected." She consulted a tablet, found my name on the guest list that Samuel had somehow managed to get me added to, and stepped aside with a welcoming gesture. "Of course, Miss Chen. Welcome to the Rodriguez New Year's celebration." As I stepped into the party, the transformation was immediate. I went from being an observer looking in to being part of the scene, surrounded by the wealth and power that had always intimidated me as a child. But I wasn't a child anymore, and I wasn't intimidated. Several people near the entrance noticed my arrival immediately. I could see recognition flickering across some faces. Mr. Chen was a known name in certain circles, even if most people had never seen her in person. A few guests began approaching me with the kind of eager interest that successful entrepreneurs attracted at these events. But I only had eyes for my family's reactions. Isabella saw me first, and I watched her face change from polite party interest to confusion, then shock, then something that might have been fear. She set down her champagne glass so quickly that it nearly tipped over her hand, moving instinctively to her throat. Victoria followed Isabella's gaze, and when her eyes found me, her face went completely white. The story she had been telling died mid-sentence, leaving her conversation partners looking confused and slightly concerned. Richard was the last to notice, still engaged in his business discussion, until he realized that both his wife and daughter were staring at something behind him. When he turned and saw me, his confident expression crumbled into complete bewilderment. I smiled and began moving through the crowd toward them, accepting congratulations from strangers who recognized my business reputation while watching my family struggle to process what they were seeing. The dead daughter had come home for New Year's Eve. Marcus was the first to approach me, extending his hand with the practiced politeness of someone raised in political circles. He had no idea who I was, but he recognized my importance from the way other guests were treating me. His smile was genuine and welcoming as he moved closer. Miss Chen, I presume I'm Marcus Wellington. My wife has mentioned your work in accessibility technology. It's wonderful to finally meet you in person. I shook his hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact that suggested confidence and honesty. Behind him, I could see Isabella frozen in place, her face pale and her eyes wide with panic. She looked like she was struggling to breathe. Actually, Mr. Wellington, I think there might be some confusion about who I am. Marcus glanced back at Isabella, clearly expecting her to join our conversation and make proper introductions. When she didn't move, his expression shifted to mild concern. Isabella, sweetheart, are you feeling all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. The irony of his words wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Several party guests had begun to notice the tension developing near the entrance, and conversations were starting to pause as people sensed drama unfolding. I decided to end Isabella's suffering and answer the question that was clearly torturing her. Mr. Wellington, I'm Maya Rodriguez. I believe your wife forgot to mention that she has an older sister. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something approaching anger as he began to process what this meant. Sister, he looked between Isabella and me, clearly searching for family resemblance that was now obvious once he knew what to look for. Isabella, you never mentioned having a sister. Isabella finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Marcus, I can explain. But Marcus was already putting pieces together in his mind, and I could see the moment when he realized the implications. His family's political aspirations required absolute transparency about potential scandals or secrets. A hidden family member was exactly the kind of thing that could destroy careers and reputations. You can explain. His voice was rising slightly, drawing more attention from nearby guests. How do you explain hiding the existence of your sister for our entire relationship, for our entire marriage? Victoria finally recovered from her shock, enough to try damage control. She approached our group with her practiced social smile, though I could see the desperation behind her eyes. Maya, darling, what a wonderful surprise. We had no idea you were in New York. The casual tone was perfectly calculated to suggest this was a pleasant family reunion rather than the return of someone they had declared dead. But I wasn't going to let her control this narrative. Actually, Mother, I think you're the one who's confused. According to what you've been telling people in Austin, I died in a car accident 7 years ago. The statement sent ripples through the nearby guests who had been pretending not to listen. I could see phones being discreetly pulled out as people began to realize they were witnessing something newsworthy. Marcus stared at his wife with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Pure shock mixed with betrayal and the beginning of real anger. You told people she was dead, Isabella. What the hell is going on here? Richard finally approached our growing group, his businessman's instincts kicking in as he tried to minimize the public scene. But his presence only made things worse, because now we had the complete family together for the first time in 7 years. Maya, he said, his voice carefully controlled, this is hardly the appropriate time or place for family discussions. Perhaps we should speak privately. I looked around at the crowd of influential people who were now openly watching our family drama unfold. Many of them had their phones out, and I could see the glow of social media apps as people began posting in real time. Actually, Dad, I think this is the perfect time and place. After all, these are all the people who believed your story about my tragic death. Don't they deserve to know the truth? The room had gone noticeably quieter as more guests realized something significant was happening. I could see Marcus's father across the room, the potential gubernatorial candidate, watching our family conflict with obvious concern about how it might affect his political prospects. Marcus was still staring at Isabella, waiting for an explanation that she clearly couldn't provide. His voice was quiet but deadly serious when he finally spoke. Isabella, I need you to tell me the truth right now. What happened to your sister, and why did I never know she existed? Isabella opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She looked trapped between the lies she had been living and the truth she had never been brave enough to tell. That's when I realized the perfect moment had arrived to reveal exactly who Maya Rodriguez had become in the 7 years since her family had written her obituary. I pulled my phone from my evening bag and opened the Forbes article that had been published just 3 months earlier. The headline read Tech Innovator, Mr. Chen revolutionizes accessibility industry with $150 million valuation. I held the screen up so Marcus could see it clearly, watching his expression change as he processed the information. Marcus, meet Mr. Chen, founder and CEO of Phoenix Accessibility Tech, also known as your dead sister-in-law. The effect was immediate and devastating. Marcus stared at the phone screen, then at me, then back at the article. His face went through a series of emotions: shock, confusion, and finally a growing anger that seemed to be directed entirely at his wife. You're Mr. Chen, the woman whose company my firm has been trying to partner with for 2 years. Several guests around us gasped audibly. I could see recognition dawning on faces throughout the room as people connected the mysterious tech entrepreneur they had heard about with the Rodriguez family drama unfolding in front of them. One of Richard's business associates, a man I recognized as the CEO of a major Austin tech company, stepped forward with amazement written across his face. Richard, your daughter is Mr. Chen. Do you have any idea how revolutionary her accessibility platforms are? My company has been using Phoenix software for 3 years. She's saved us millions in compliance costs while actually improving our products. Richard's face went ashen as the implications began to sink in. Not only was his supposedly dead daughter very much alive, but she had become more successful than he had ever been, and everyone in this room now knew it. I decided to continue the revelations while I had everyone's attention. Marcus, since you value honesty and transparency, I think you should know that your wife's family has been living a lie for 7 years. They didn't just hide my existence from you. They've been telling everyone in Austin that I died in a car accident because it was easier than explaining why I left. Victoria tried to interrupt, her voice shrill with panic. Maya, you're being dramatic. We never said you died, we just said you had moved away and were difficult to contact. I pulled out my phone again and opened a voice recording app, playing back audio that Jennifer had captured of Victoria at a charity luncheon 6 months earlier. Victoria's voice filled the immediate area, clear and unmistakable. It's been so difficult since we lost Maya in that terrible accident. Isabella was devastated, of course. They were so close. Sometimes I think that's why Isabella has thrown herself into her career so completely, to honor her sister's memory. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked at his wife with an expression of complete betrayal and disgust. You've been lying about this for our entire relationship. What else have you lied about, Isabella? That's when I decided to answer his question with the evidence I had been saving for this moment. I reached into my evening bag and pulled out the legal documents Jennifer had prepared. Marcus, since you're asking about lies, you might be interested to know that your father-in-law has been embezzling money from family trust funds to pay for Isabella's modeling career. Here's the documentation showing how he systematically stole my inheritance over a 3-year period. I handed him the papers, watching as he scanned the financial records with the trained eye of an investment banker. His face grew darker with each page. This shows systematic fraud spanning multiple years, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Richard, these are federal crimes we're looking at here. Richard tried to bluster his way through a defense. Now see here, that money was invested in legitimate family business expenses. Maya benefited from those investments indirectly. But I wasn't finished yet. There was one more revelation that would complete the destruction of my family's carefully constructed facade. Actually, Marcus, there's something else you should know about your mother-in-law's relationship with honesty. Samuel Chen, the venture capitalist who's been mentoring me for the past 6 years, had a very interesting relationship with Victoria back in the late 90s. Would you like to see the photographs? Victoria's face went completely white, and she actually swayed on her feet as if she might faint. Richard turned to stare at his wife with an expression of dawning comprehension and fury. The room around us had become completely silent except for the soft jazz music still playing from the sound system. Every guest was watching our family implode in real time, and I could see the glow of phone screens as people documented the scandal on social media. Marcus looked at the legal documents in his hands, then at his wife, who was now crying silently, then at his in-laws, who were both looking like they wanted to disappear entirely. "Isabella," he said quietly, his voice carrying a finality that suggested major decisions were being made. "I think we need to have a very long conversation about the foundation of our marriage and whether there's anything real left to save." As the clock on the wall showed 11:58, I realized that my family's perfect New Year's Eve celebration had become the night their lies finally caught up with them. And in exactly 2 minutes, we would all be starting a very different kind of new year. The countdown had begun around us, voices throughout the room calling out 10, 9, 8, but the numbers felt surreal against the backdrop of my family's destruction. I looked at each of them in turn, taking in the full scope of what 7 years of lies and deception had cost them. Isabella was crying openly now, mascara streaking down her face as she realized her marriage might not survive the night. Marcus stood rigid beside her, the legal documents still clutched in his hand like evidence at a crime scene. His political family's worst nightmare was unfolding in real-time broadcast, live on social media by dozens of influential guests. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. As 2025 began with champagne toasts and celebration around us, my family stood in stunned silence. But I wasn't finished yet. The midnight moment felt like the perfect time to offer them something they had never given me a chance at redemption. I stepped closer to Isabella, lowering my voice so only our family could hear over the party noise. "Isabella, I know you're struggling, and I know the pressure our parents put on you contributed to some unhealthy patterns. Phoenix has partnerships with several excellent treatment centers that specialize in helping people develop healthier relationships with food and exercise. I'd like to help you get the support you deserve." Her eyes widened with surprise through her tears. "Maya, after everything we did to you, why would you help me? Because despite everything, you're still my sister. And because I learned something important over these past 7 years. Revenge without purpose is just cruelty, and I'm not cruel." I turned to Richard, pulling out the business card my lawyers had prepared. "Dad, you're going to face serious legal consequences for what you did with my trust fund and your business practices. But I've instructed my legal team to pursue civil remedies rather than criminal charges if you make full restitution within 60 days. I'm not interested in destroying you, just in getting justice." Richard took the card with shaking hands, his face gray with the realization of how close he had come to federal prosecution. Victoria was the hardest to address because her betrayal felt the most personal. But as I looked at her, I saw not the powerful socialite who had terrorized my childhood, but an aging woman whose entire identity was built on maintaining appearances that were crumbling around her. "Mother, your social standing is going to take a significant hit when this story spreads. But Phoenix's charitable foundation could use someone with your event planning and fundraising experience. If you're genuinely interested in making amends, there are ways to rebuild your reputation through meaningful work." Marcus had been quiet through all of this processing, the enormity of what he had learned about his wife's family. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but resolute. "Isabella, I love you, but I can't build a life with someone who's capable of lying about something this fundamental. I need time to figure out if there's enough truth left between us to work with." He handed the legal documents back to me. "Maya, I apologize for my family's potential involvement in any political pressure that might come from this situation. You deserve to tell your story without interference." As the party continued around us, gradually returning to normal as guests processed what they had witnessed, I realized I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not the satisfaction of revenge, but the deep calm that comes from finally standing in your truth. The little girl who had been pushed out of family photos and excluded from Christmas cards was gone forever. The young woman who had fled Austin believing she was worthless had been transformed by struggle and determination into someone powerful enough to offer mercy to those who had shown her none. Samuel appeared at my elbow as the family began to disperse, each member dealing with their own crisis. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Free," I answered. "Finally, completely free." Over the following months, the story of the Rodriguez family's deception became a cautionary tale in both Austin and Manhattan social circles. Phoenix Accessibility Tech's reputation only grew stronger as people learned about the personal struggles that had inspired its creation. Isabella did get the professional support she needed and began using her platform to advocate for mental health awareness. Richard made full restitution and began working as a consultant, his empire reduced but his family intact. Victoria threw herself into charity work with surprising dedication, perhaps finding genuine purpose for the first time in her life. And me, I learned that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's becoming so successful that you can afford to be generous with your enemies. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've been told you weren't smart enough or good enough, if you've had to rebuild yourself from nothing, I want you to know that your differences aren't deficits, they're your superpowers waiting to be discovered. Share your story in the comments below, and if this resonated with you, please subscribe for more stories about turning pain into purpose and finding strength in the struggle.